The English release of Unleashed is just around the corner, which means a bunch of massive changes are about to impact the Riftbound meta. Changes that will almost certainly affect which decks you want to play throughout the upcoming format. So today we'll be taking a look at 4 legends that are in good position to become really solid decks to one trick. In other words, legends that will heavily reward the players that choose to stick with playing just them and no other deck. This short list consists of 2 Unleashed decks and 2 decks from previous sets that have decent potential to play well into what the Unleashed meta will likely evolve into, while also not being so popular that the community starts to overwhelmingly tech for them. So you can rule out underwhelming legends like Mighty Demacia, as it's unlikely that he'll perform very well. And you can also rule out legends like Glorious Executioner, as even after the bans, his consistent popularity makes him a prime target for sideboard tech. The first deck we'll be taking a look at is Gloomist. Gloomist is the newest Calm and Chaos legend with a core philosophy that's pretty opposite of her predecessors. Her ability allows you to exhaust her to draw 1 card every time you hold. A lot of people have been skeptical of this legend, especially before the full set was revealed, because of 2 key pain points. First, the ability doesn't seem that strong, and second, hold play styles have been known to be significantly weaker than conquer strategies throughout the first 2 sets. However, the meta-defining legends of each format so far have been the legends with arguably the simplest abilities. Drawing an extra card every turn is very strong, which just leaves the question of how often you'll actually be able to hold and trigger the draw. This is where Gloomist's chosen champion comes in. Vex Apathetic is a 4-might Chaos unit that costs 4 energy and 0 power. Compared to Draven Vanquisher and Kaisa Survivor, we know this is a really good rate for a chosen champion. She also has Deflect and an absurd ability that temporarily stuns and prevents the movement of every unit played by opponents while she's at a battlefield. Combine this with her signature unit and the plethora of defensive options in the Calm and Chaos domains, and you have the first hold legend that could be a legitimate threat to the meta. So how do you actually want to build Gloomist? Well, there are 2 unique builds with a decent amount of overlap that will likely develop for Vex throughout this format. The first is a standard hold and control build, with key cards like Shadow, Back Off, Not So Fast, and Guardian Angel. This style for Vex will revolve around pushing the game into a 1 battlefield state. Then, with the battlefield secured, it aims to slow down your opponent through Vex Apathetic stun ability and other control options. This will feel somewhat similar to Blade Dancer's Protect the Queen strategy, as your primary goal is to keep Vex on the battlefield and protect her at all costs. The other playstyle that will likely be a bit more niche is a sort of stun offense. Still working with Vex Apathetic, this playstyle revolves heavily around cards like Nami Headstrong, Maunch, and a variety of stun options, to continuously run into 1 battlefield while you're holding the other. You can think of this build as a more fully realized version of Radiant Dawn, but one that swaps her order strategies for chaos tricks. This could end up being a sub-strategy of the first build, but I'm unsure if the traditional hold strategy will benefit as much from allocating resources to this conquer element. Gloomist will serve as the hold strategy's first legitimate test for competitive Riftbound. So the strong design of the legend's overall package, mixed with the community's lack of faith for hold decks, makes her a decent one-trick option for this upcoming format. The second Unleashed legend we'll look at is Scorn of the Moon. In the Spiritforge format, Prodigal Explorer showed us that the Mind and Chaos domain combination has some of the strongest synergy when it comes to combos and high-level skill expression. While Scorn of the Moon doesn't have access to quite the same draw power, she trades it for extra energy during showdowns. This naturally leans into a pretty similar strategy to Prodigal Explorer in terms of getting into showdowns with as much energy as possible so you can throw loads of spells at your opponent. But the slight difference of emphasizing energy over draws makes a significant difference in how the legend should be piloted. Where Prodigal Explorer prefers to use unit targeting spells to draw, Scorn of the Moon is a little more open to a variety of spells, as long as they can help her win showdowns. With its success fresh on our minds, an alternative version of Prodigal Explorer will likely cover most of Diana's initial deck list, but I don't think that build philosophy is guaranteed to stick long term. Unlike Prodigal Explorer, Scorn of the Moon isn't looking for multiple instances of targeting per turn, so it doesn't have to lean as heavily into repeat spells. Between her chosen champion, Diana Lunari, battlefields like Ravenbloom Conservatory, and all of the new predict cards in the Mind domain, she finds most of her draw power and in-game customization from the predict keyword, which gives her very seamless agency when it comes to setting up her hand with the best answers for each matchup. Control builds are naturally viable, but all of the predict support also makes her a prime candidate for mid-range Nocturne Horrifying builds. On a different note, her other chosen champion, Diana No Longer Human, her signature spell, the new Abandoned Hall battlefield, and the expanded pool of combat tricks for the Mind domain make Scorn of the Moon a legitimate combat threat, which opens up lanes for a more traditional tempo build as well. All this versatility leaves Scorn of the Moon as one of the best positioned Unleashed legends, as she can efficiently slot into control roles that have proven successful in the past, but she also has room to adapt to however the meta may develop. Moving on to legends from previous sets, the first noteworthy legend is Relentless Storm. While I don't think that Relentless Storm will come anywhere close to defining the meta, it's very likely that Elder Dragon will be one of the most meta-defining cards in this format. And I don't think any legend can utilize Elder Dragon better than Relentless Storm. Of all the body's domain combinations, the Fury domain benefits the most from Elder Dragon, as the domain that deals damage to opposing units the most often. And of the 3 Body and Fury legends, Relentless Storm has much more synergy with Elder Dragon than Purifier and Pride Stalker do. This one unit on its own could catapult Relentless Storm from his status as a meta card legend to a legitimate meta threat. When building around Elder Dragon, Dazzling Aurora is pretty obviously the best supporting card. It was the most important card throughout the Origins meta, and while it did fall off a bit in Spirit Forge, it will always be able to take wins against opponents who don't sideboard for it. The tricky part about Dazzling Aurora is just how prevalent gear removal has become. Every domain has access to some kind of gear removal now, and they're all incentivized to use it because of equipment. This is where I become curious about the potential for a tempo iteration of Relentless Storm. Relentless Storm naturally wants to only run mighty units so that he can benefit from his legend ability, but I think the new unit Dragonsoul Sage could open up the door for other possibilities. At reaction speed, this unit can be exhausted to add 1 energy, so in an ideal scenario, this means that you can play Elder Dragon for only 9 energy if you have 3 of this unit already on board. The main problem with Dazzling Aurora decks is that they have to forfeit the early game in hopes of coming back late by outscaling their opponent, but Dragonsoul Sage could create a new build for Relentless Storm where he can start playing mighty units earlier and scale more consistently into his late game board, all without the risk of losing to a gear removal spell on Dazzling Aurora. I could be reaching with how much I think Elder Dragon will improve Relentless Storm's standing in the meta, and we could definitely see a lot of sideboard tech for the dragon that will make it difficult to play. But as it stands now, I think Relentless Storm is one of the biggest winners from Origins heading into Unleashed, even before looking at new supportive cards like Repulse, Clash of Giants, and Arachnoid Horror. The final deck we'll be looking at is the Boss. After closing out the Spirit Forge season with a 7th place finish at the Atlanta RQ, the Boss is looking like a super underrated legend right now. Combine this with some pretty significant buff support that Unleashed is providing, and he's looking like a really solid pickup heading into set 3. The most obvious support is the new Value of Idols battlefield, which allows players to pay 1 energy to buff any unit that they play to that battlefield. This is helpful when holding battlefields, but also has some interesting interactions with ambush units as well, as you can instantly buff any ambush unit and save it with your legend all in the same showdown. You also have 2 more unit protection cards in Repulse and Tactical Retreat, which are basically the body and order equivalents of Not So Fast and Zonia's Hourglass respectively. Combine those 2 spells with the boss's legend ability, and it's going to be virtually impossible to permanently remove the boss's units. As for builds, not much to change for the boss, as his typical mid-range playstyle already has a really strong identity. He matches up incredibly well into control decks, and with better defensive tools now available, he should be able to play into combat-oriented decks with much more confidence. The boss just has so many ways to buff units efficiently, pressure opponents offensively, and now protect his units on the other end of showdowns even more consistently. He's positioned to be one of the most consistent legends heading into Unleashed, and definitely worth investing in. If you're interested in checking out any of these legends, I've left my current builds that I've been testing with in the description. And definitely let me know your thoughts on these legends, and if you think there are other underrated options for the Unleashed format. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. Good luck in your games, and thanks for watching.